In a court where powerful alphas claim women like trophies, Genevieve plays a dangerous game, using her sharp wit to break arranged marriages without ever touching a blade. But her brilliance shatters when she meets Alpha King Alistair, a dominant sovereign who orchestrates a breathtaking seduction of his own, turning her into his public obsession to force his unwanted bride to back off. Now trapped in her own web, Genevieve must figure out where the political theatre ends and the fierce protective reality of a fated mate begins. The scent of crushed lavender and dried hemlock always lingered in the corners of the grand salon, a subtle testament to the fragile illusions women used to protect themselves. Genevieve adjusted the high lace collar of her gown, a muted dove-grey silk she had spent her meagre savings to commission. In a room filled with the daughters of the high alpha nobility, women clad in vibrant crimson and spun gold, Genevieve was designed to be invisible, a quiet companion, a chaperone, a harmless backdrop, which was exactly why she was the most dangerous woman in the continental courts. She didn't use blades. She never used her body. Genevieve used words. She used the fragile egos of powerful men, whispering the exact philosophical truths and subtle changes that made traditionalist alphas call off their arranged matches. She was a ghost broker of freedom, orchestrating intellectual entanglements that made arrogant lords believe they were the ones choosing to break a marriage contract, sparing the terrified princess who begged for her help from a lifetime of subjugation. Tonight, her target was supposed to be Lord Sterling, a brutal alpha from the western borders. She had positioned herself near the terrace, waiting for the moment to slip into his orbit and begin the delicate mental chess that would free a young duchess from his claim. Instead, her phone chimed with a frantic text from her informant. Abort. General Sterling left an hour ago. The sovereign of the eastern skies just took the floor. If he catches you operating, it's treason. Genevieve's breath hitched. She looked out across the glittering ballroom. The ambient noise of the crowd had suddenly flattened into a tense, breathless silence. The man who had just entered did not belong in a room of courtly dancing. He was exceptionally tall, his shoulders broad and dominant beneath a midnight blue military doublet that bore no medals because his very presence was the only rank that mattered. His face was striking, rugged sculpture of high cheekbones and a ruthless jaw, but it was his eyes that made Genevieve freeze. They were a piercing, luminous shade of golden rum. Before she could slip away into the shadows of the gallery, the crowd parted like water before a prow. "You are retreating early, Lady Genevieve," a voice murmured. It sounded like the low thundering, rolling across a distant valley, deep, velvety and vibrating, with an ancient, terrifying authority that hummed straight through the stone floor into the soles of her shoes. Genevieve turned, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The sovereign himself, Alpha King Alistair, was standing directly in front of her. "Your Majesty," Genevieve said, dipping into a flawless, humble courtesy, keeping her eyes lowered to maintain her facade of harmless court mouse. "I was merely seeking the quiet of the gardens. I do not wish to crowd your space." "You could never crowd my space," Alistair said smoothly. He stepped closer, and the sheer, radiant heat emanating from his body enveloped her, smelling faintly of ozone, cedarwood, and cold mountain air. "In fact, I find the rest of this room entirely vacant now that I'm standing here." He reached out, his large, warm hand surprisingly gentle as he offered his arm. When he tilted his head, the low candlelight caught his teeth, revealing canines that were just a fraction sharper than humanly possible, a silent marker of the apex predator. Walk with me. Let us discuss the nature of freedom. The hours that followed felt entirely detached from the grand gala happening just beyond the glass doors of the conservatory. Genevieve prided herself on being the puppet master, the one who steered the conversation with invisible threads. But from the moment they sat among the neighbouring blooming jasmine, Alistair dismantled her defences without touching her once. He didn't boast of his territories or his power. Instead, he turned a blinding, suffocating, intense focus entirely upon her mind. People believe the greatest power lies in the ability to conquer, Alistair said, his golden eyes locking onto hers with a precision that made the rest of the world fade into white noise. He swirled the dark amber liquid in his glass. But I have always believed the truest power belongs to the one who can untie a knot without breaking the thread. Wouldn't you agree, Genevieve? A cold shiver of panic, laced with an intoxicating heat, shot up her spine. He knew, or at least he suspected. An interesting philosophy, Your Majesty, Genevieve replied, lifting her chin, refusing to break under his gaze. But knots are usually tied to keep things secure. Some might consider untying them an act of sabotage. Only if the things bound within them wished to be held, Alistair murmured, his voice dropping to a low, seductive growl that vibrated directly in her chest. To hold a soul against its will is a tyrant's game. It requires a rare kind of brilliance to see the invisible cages of this court, and a dangerous amount of courage to dismantle them. He leaned closer, his gaze tracing the lines of her face with a reverence that felt terrifyingly genuine. For a split second, the gold in his eyes flared, glowing with a fierce ancient light. A wave of absolute commanding alpha power rippled through the air, heavy and intoxicating. It should have sent her running in terror, but instead it felt like a massive shield, walling her off from the very court she spent her life outsmarting. By the time the clock struck midnight, her mind spinning from a conversation that felt less like a courtship and more like a beautifully choreographed duel. As Alistair escorted her to her carriage, he didn't make a standard arrogant demand for her time. He simply bowed his head and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. The sheer protective tenderness of the gesture made her throat tighten. He slipped a heavy cream-coloured card embossed with a silver hawk into her hand. Until tomorrow, Genevieve. Do not keep your sovereign waiting. Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel for more immersive stories. It really helps me out. Now let's return to Genevieve and Alistair. The next morning, the trap snapped shut. Genevieve sat into her small apartment, staring at the political registries in the eastern skies. Her hands were trembling so violently, she nearly dropped her tea. Alistair wasn't just playing games. He was currently bound to an arranged marriage with Princess Iselda of the Northern Wastes, a volatile, hyper-traditionalist alliance. If Alistair broke the contract, the Northern Wastes would declare an immediate catastrophic war. But if Iselda was the one to call it off, she chose to back away because she believed Alistair's heart belonged entirely to someone else, then the treaty would dissolve peacefully. Alistair wasn't investigating Genevieve. He was seducing her. He was using her own tactics against her, projecting a profound public devotion so intense that Iselda would be forced to break the engagement first to save her own pride. He was using her as a political shield, and yet, as Genevieve remembered the fierce protective warmth in his golden eyes, a devastating truth settled in her chest. She wasn't just playing a part. She had genuinely fallen for him. For 3 weeks, the public courtship became the scandal of the High Court. Everywhere they went, Alistair treated Genevieve not as a passing fancy, but as his absolute equal. He brought her to the strategic councils, listened to her economic philosophies, and watched her with a heavy, breathless adoration that left the court paralyzed with shock. He was playing the role of a man completely possessed by a humble companion. But the final dangerous climax came at the spring conclave, a mandatory gathering where the marriage contract with Princess Iselda was meant to be ratified. The grand amphitheatre was packed with the supernatural elite. Genevieve sat in the gallery dressed in a simple gown of pale silver silk. The atmosphere was thick with hostility. The northern traditionalists looked up at her with a naked hatred. Princess Iselda stood at the centre altar, flanked by her warlords. She was a woman of ice and pride, and she looked up at the gallery, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "This conclave is a farce," Iselda declared, her eyes flashing with rage. "I will not ratify this treaty. Look at him. The sovereign of the eastern skies has allowed himself to be blinded by a common mouse, a woman with no lineage, no military power, no blood right. She is a non-entity who has crawled into his court." Iselda sneered, pointing a gauntleted hand at Genevieve. "He treats her, a servant, like a queen. It is an absolute insult to my house, an insult to our traditions. I refuse to marry a man whose soul has been stolen by an ordinary nobody. I dissolve this match, and I demand satisfaction for the insult." A collective gasp rippled through thousands of shifters in attendance. War hung on razor's edge. Suddenly, the air in the massive amphitheatre vanished. A crushing, suffocating aura of pure apex alpha dominance slammed into the room. The stone pillars groaned under the sudden immense pressure. Several of the northern warlords dropped to their knees, gasping for breath, their pride utterly crushed under a weight of older than the mountains. Alistair stepped forward, his eyes entirely alight, glowing with a lethal, blinding gold. His canines were fully bared, a terrifying aura of death and shadow rolling off his shoulders. He didn't look at Iselda. He looked up at the gallery, his eyes locking onto Genevieve. In a heartbeat, he was moving, leaping the distance to the gallery and pulling her down to the center floor, his massive arm knocking securely around her waist. The moment his warmth enveloped her, the suffocating pressure vanished for her, leaving her perfectly safe in the eyes of a storm. Alistair turned his glowing, lethal gaze onto Iselda and the northern delegation. "You speak of worth, Iselda," Alistair whispered, his voice resonating like thunder through the silent wall. "But you understand nothing of it. You chose to back away from this match to save your pride, and I accept your withdrawal. The treaty resolves by your hand, without war." His grip tightened on Genevieve, pulling her flush against his chest, his voice rising so the entire continental court could hear him. "But do not dare call her a nobody. Genevieve is the mate of my soul. Her worth is measured by a brilliance and a strategic mind that has freed more captive hearts than all of your armies combined. She has no need for a crown of gold, because she rules my mind, my heart, and my territory. His gaze swept across the thousands of kneeling nobles. If any among you think her ordinary, step forward now and face the sovereign's fire. No one moved. The northern warlords remained on their knees, completely subdued. Alistair looked down at Genevieve, the terrifying warlord melting away in an instant, replaced by a gaze of such raw, bleeding vulnerability it made her breath hitch. He leaned down, his voice a private whisper meant only for her. I started this to save a kingdom, Genevieve, but I swear to you, on my immortal soul, I ended it because I cannot breathe without you. Forgive me for the trap, and let me spend eternity being yours. Genevieve looked into his golden eyes, seeing the brilliant king who had matched her mind and captured her heart. There is nothing to forgive, Alistair, she whispered. You didn't trap me. I chose to stay. And there, before the conquered elite of the realm, he bent his head and pressed his lips to hers, a slow, deep burning kiss that sealed their fates and rewrote the history of the courts forever. Thank you so much for exploring this story of wit, strategy, and fated love with me tonight. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments and talk about Genevieve and Alistair's intellectual duel. If you loved this slow burn, paranormal romance and want to experience more tales of powerful alphas and brilliant heroines, please take a moment to subscribe, hit that like button, and join our storytelling community. Until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.